So I'm the UK lead for AI at Microsoft. Oh, the microphone is working now. So yes, I recently joined the organization a couple of months ago, and my focus is looking at our overall strategy of AI across the UK, everything from business to the skills sector as well, and looking at how we can actually proliferate the use of AI across the board, but obviously making sure that it's both, fair and accessible and ethical and transparent.
Okay, so this session is called Myths and Realities About AI, and just to make sure everyone's actually awake, I'm going to ask some questions. I'm going to put some ideas out to you, and you have to tell us here whether you think they're myths or realities. Excuse me. So just put your hand up if you think it's a myth that there's an AI system you can email which will set up calendar appointments for meetings. Is it a myth or is it reality? Is it a myth? Put your hand up. Is it reality? Yep, it's true. It really exists. It's called X.AI. Perhaps you've heard of it. Is it a myth that self-driving cars can drive themselves anywhere in the world without human intervention? That's true. It is a myth. They can't actually do that because they can't cope with snow, they can't cope with fog, they can't cope with all the many ways in which people are very, very peculiar. They're quite good on California roads, but self-driving cars, the AIs behind them aren't actually that good yet. Let's see, another one. Is it a myth that all the topics for this conference were chosen by an AI? Think about this one. People are not sure. Yeah, okay, we've got some insider knowledge. It's true, it's a myth, actually. People chose it. People actually did choose this. So we're sort of getting an idea. Is it a myth that AI is coming to take all your jobs? Yeah, okay, so people are, okay, is it a reality? How many of the people who think it's a reality? Yeah, some people stroking their chins here. Okay, but mostly people think it's a myth. So now we have a sort of picture of what you think about AI and what it is and what it isn't. I think that to some extent there's still a lack of understanding perhaps about what are the nuts and bolts? What are the phrases that we would hear people use around AI? What are the things that it's actually built on? How, if someone's saying, I'm going to go and build an AI system, what actually are they going to go and do, Maya?
Okay, so, now I'm here, I've arrived. Okay, so I think there's a couple of words that we actually need to look over and define. So when we're talking about AI, the three are AI, machine learning, and deep learning are the three that are very common. And I think there's often quite a kind of like a misunderstanding of what those three things mean. So when we're talking about AI, generally, we are talking about the embodiment of essentially human intellect. Usually we're looking at human capability of reasoning, deduction, pattern recognition, and prediction, but taking all of those kind of qualities that make us who we are and figuring out ways of turning those into processes and algorithms by which we can apply those to machines. So AI is essentially the study of intelligence, human intelligence, as applied to machines. Now, when we're talking about ML or machine learning is actually a method by which we actually train computers and AIs, right? So when we're talking about machine learning, we are talking about taking, let's just say a computer for sake of ease of description. We're asking a computer or a machine to actually take on a whole bunch of data, and within that, find patterns, and then from that experience of finding patterns and key features in that data, make predictions on data it hasn't seen before. So very much the way humans actually learn, as you're learning languages, as you are learning your way around the world, not everything is explained to you. You start realizing, when you're wandering around and you fall over that maybe, if I position my hands and my feet in a particular fashion, I'm going to stabilize myself. And you see that as well as some really, really funky stuff in robotics. Again, it's just literally machines learning how to, through experience, basically, to see the world through experience. And then the other thing we talk about is deep learning. And when we're talking about deep learning, we're actually talking about a technique by which we apply machine learning in the field of AI overall. So deep learning is using the human brain as a kind of pattern for which we teach computers. So you may have heard of the notion of neural networks. So neural networks are composed of neurons, and they work very much in the same way as the human brain does. You will basically have input that will be driven through these layers, and each neuron within these layers will be responsible for understanding a particular feature of the data set that it's actually being given. And combining all those different aspects, it will then provide with an output. So a classic example would be, and you see this all the time, an image of a cat or a dog. You will then provide a set of images to your neural network. The neural network will identify the aspects of maybe curves, maybe some grayscale, some lines here and there that will define whiskers. And then it will, through some very complex mathematics, churn out the output and define that image as an image or of a cat or a dog. So when people talk about building an AI system, they're not just talking about just one particular technology. Deep learning is one of them. They're talking about how they are going to use that data. There's three aspects. Essentially, you are looking at data that you need to examine, to make predictions on, to find patterns in. You're looking at the computational side of things, and that is both the hardware and the speed of that hardware. And you're looking at the algorithms. And combining those three things together will provide you with an AI system. So I think we've covered some of the fundamentals.
That's the basis. So why is it then that we're hearing so much more about this? I mean, AI as a concept has been around since the 1960s, 70s. I mean, if you want, you could even go back all the way to the sort of wartime and the ideas then.
Yeah.
Why are we hearing so much more about it now in the past 5 years or so?
I think it's just as I was saying, it's a convergence of those three forces, right? So over the last few years, we've actually seen this escalation in technology. So cloud computing, they're talking about power of processors. Now, the algorithms for AI have been around since, as you were saying, the 60s, but to actually utilize them has been it's just taken its time for the technology to evolve to actually implement some of these algorithms. And not just now, just those two things, sorry. If everybody remembers the whole thing about, it's the era of big data back in 2012, 2013, it is that for AI to truly manifest itself, it needs tons and tons of data. And it's the first time in human history we've actually seen that massive explosion of data. So if you recall back in, I think it was about 2012, 2013, where back in the day of that quote of, at that point, humanity has created 98% of the world's information in the last 2 years alone. And it will continue to accelerate.
So it's really this fact of having all the data available and having lots of cloud compute platforms. So there's Microsoft and there's Google and there's Amazon, which all provide easy ways to scale lots of computing power. That's why we're now hearing about this so much now. Yeah. Where then? How do we measure the progress? I mean, is it, in computing we have Moore's law where we say, things get twice as fast every 18 months or so. Yeah. Is there a way to measure progress in AI so that we can sort of know where we are along the road towards things?
I think that's really tricky. I think if you want to talk about the speed at which models are trained, the power of prediction. So, we've all heard the stories, of algorithms being able to play Go and chess. If you want to talk about machines that are able to kind of process information faster, then you can almost, even sitting in the room, just from the stories that you hear, think, there's some kind of linear upward progression, right? But I think in the long term, it's very, and overall, looking at things overall, it's very difficult to actually measure the progress of AI because AI is infused and embedded into everything that we do. So from your emails, from your mobile phones, from your computer, you've got your conversational devices, and everybody is working on the different aspects of AI. The three parts we talked about, the data, the algorithms and the computing power, we're all working on those parts that make AI. It's an emergent technology that basically comes out from those components. We're all working on it at different rates and different speeds. So it's very, very tricky right now to actually say, in the life cycle of what AI is right now to where it should be, we are here at this epoch. It's very tricky to actually do that.
So if we focus a bit more on your needs as an audience, you're thinking about events and events planning,
Yeah.
which involves, for example, making phone calls to people or dealing with phone calls from people. Google, for example, has a product called Google Duplex, which will make calls, and it's sort of announced a version of this which will screen calls in case they're spam calls, produces a transcript. What are the sort of things that are useful in everyday ways that we're seeing here? I mean, things like, I don't know, translation or transcription.
Okay. So in terms of the events industry, the things that I see that are useful for you guys are the things that I also use when I'm actually going out to events and preparing my materials and such. So the things that I'm actually seeing, and if I refer to some of the products and services we produce at Microsoft, plug, some of the things I find absolutely fascinating is just how we can take our creative content, put it into PowerPoint, and have something like PowerPoint actually design our slides for us, saving us some time, right? So
Say that again. PowerPoint will design the slides for you.
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay.
You can now actually take, I can literally now look at a whole bunch of images, insert pictures, Design AI will actually say, how do you want to arrange these images? You will get a series of images and you think, oh, fantastic. I don't have to spend ages looking at font, whether or not I want this image in a circle, do I want it to fade in and out, how do I lay these things out? And it'll do the same thing with like timelines and such. And that is just on a very practical level that affects and impacts your job, right? The other thing that I found absolutely fascinating is that so PowerPoint will actually also do real-time translation from speech to text. So, and it will do it in different languages. And the same facility or capability plus one, as in like leveling up, is available in Skype as well. Speech to speech in a different language, real-time translation. And you can imagine the impact something like that will actually have in the events industry, especially if it starts becoming common usage, where you do not have to worry about the language barriers of delivering a particular amount of, type of content. You just have to think about the messaging and just getting it out there. This technology will actually facilitate you doing something like that.
So on a Skype call, you could be talking to someone in a different country about booking a place, and you'd be able to get the translation. You wouldn't even know that they're talking French and you're talking English.
Yeah, pretty much. And there's, I think if you actually go into the website and have a look, search through for the real-time translation, there's this beautiful video of children, one of them speaking in Spanish, one of them speaking in English, talking to each other in real time. And it's very emotive, actually. It brought me to tears a little bit. I was like, oh my God, this is the future. So,
not having to bother to learn languages.
No, it's not that. In fact, I think what that particular technology like that does for everybody is that you can now start focusing on understanding the person that you're communicating with, trying to empathize with them. And it's a fantastic enabler.
Mm-hmm. And what about things like planning, for project planning and so on? When Gantt charts are the bane of many people's lives. Is AI starting to move into that space, do you think?
I'm trying to think of a particular use case for Gantt charts. I try not to, if I'm brutally honest. But there are lots of capabilities out there now that come as standard for organizational tools. So it's even prevalent in your Outlook that you can, open up your email and you can apply AI filters to that to actually to kind of prioritize your emails to what's actually important to you, and everyone can actually turn that bespoke. And it's just infused into everything that you see nowadays.
So is that what we should expect more then from the spread of AI, is that it's not so much that it sort of arrives one day on your doorstep, that it's not a sort of a big package and you say, oh my God, it's an AI and it's going to do. It's more that it just sort of suffuses through everything that you do, everything you use. I mean, I sort of noticed, for example, coming here from Liverpool Street, that you've got a big Huawei billboard there, which is promoting artificial intelligence on its camera. Google talks about computational photography on its systems. Apple sort of has had Siri since whenever. That all these AI systems just sort of quietly find their way into our lives, rather than it being a big bang.
Exactly, and I think that's what successful technology actually does. It's almost, when it starts to become, as you say, suffused into your lives, it's almost invisible. And it has been happening so slowly, and it's like, it's not about when will AI arrive. AI has been around for absolutely ages. You use it on your mobile phone systems, you use it on your email. It's pretty much everywhere. When you're designing your PowerPoint presentations, from your heating, electrics, and photography as well, it's everywhere. And the thing is, I'll give you an example from my own personal experience. I had somebody come over to actually check my boiler system, and I'm still of that age where I'm expecting somebody to arrive with a toolkit. And the gentleman turned up, he opened the cupboard, and he stood there with the phone. And I looked at him and I thought, what are you doing? He said, I'm just updating the app. And I thought, right. And he turned around to me and said, oh, it's fine. We can run the diagnostics remotely to actually figure out if anything is actually needed. And I thought, okay, this is very bizarre. And then he said to me, so how has it been managing your heating? And I thought, I've been managing my heating, right?
Oh, you're doing it wrong.
Apparently, yeah. Or I did it so well. But the system's already there. And I realized, yes, it has been doing it very well. It started to notice, I have had some interaction with it, obviously, but it has been doing it very well to know when I'm in the house, when things need to be a certain temperature. And yeah, it's just part of my day-to-day life that I just don't even think about it anymore.
So then, when we have these technologies which come sort of gradually into our lives, does that mean we don't get the same disruption that we might otherwise expect? I mean, because, as I say, the noise that we hear is people worrying about jobs going. But if it's a slow diffusion into the systems that we use, does that mean the potential for disruption for actual job categories to disappear? Changes that instead those people just redefine the jobs they're doing, or sort of move upscale in terms of the intelligence involved?
I think there are several things going on there. So there's the speed of which disruption happens, and the way I imagine, or I foresee disruption or understand it, is something that changes the way we do things previous to what it was, right? And already things like RPAs, automating various systems and processes, have already been in place for quite some time. And everybody here has already had experience of that, whether or not you're conscious of it, where you've managed to save some time by managing your diary a little bit better. That will have had some influence from AI, right, from technologies. And what that has meant is that you free up time to do other things. Now, I think with regards to AI, it's not going to be one day you wake up and, oh my God, that's the end of whatever it is that I'm doing, right? It's never going to be like that. We are actually more empowered and more in control of AI and the progress of technology than I think it's, let's just be polite about this, than it gets portrayed maybe in general media. We are in charge of it. All these technologies go through the standard cycle of people testing it, and the success of that is always fed back to the organizations, right? It's never going to be just one thing that's just suddenly going to change everything. I think, unlike, say, the disruption caused by the automotive industry, when you suddenly had cars and went from cars from horse-drawn carriages, even that still took time, a very short space of time, but that was a dramatic change. AI will continue to be, unless we have some dramatic technological change, like, say, in quantum computing, it will continue to be kind of like a manageable, an experiential process where we will have a say in how things are done.
Do you think, though, that it may be one of these things, I suppose the question is AI a democratic product? Is it a democratic technology that will be available equally to everyone? Or is it one of those things where the more you spend, the better it is, and that will give you a huge advantage?
I think the notion that the more you spend, the better it is, give you a huge advantage is this thing people have in their mind when you look at like the big organizations, the big corporates who are able to invest an awful lot of money into research. But the beautiful thing about AI is that any one of us in the room here can now utilize some of the platforms and the services provided by large software and computing techs and organizations and make it our own. That's a beautiful thing about AI. It is a democratic technology, unlike previous evolutions where we have seen the impact of a sum of small individuals creating a technology and disrupting everything. it is where everybody has a say and impact in it. There will always be AI in development in transport, in healthcare, in communications, in the events industry, and that won't be created by one or two or three, small groups of individuals or organizations. It's the combined effort of all of us.
So when, I mean, it's on pretty much a certainty that, the people in this room will be approached in the next few years by companies to say, hey, we've got a really great AI system which is going to revolutionize, your work in the events industry. It's going to, really take it over. Should they believe that small companies can do this, or is it one of these things where, oh no, if it's not Amazon or Google or Microsoft, then you can't possibly do it. A small company can't do it. Can a small company revolutionize this space?
I do believe that a small company can revolutionize this space. I think it's a concerted effort between two sides, but I think it's going to be driven by the people with the domain expertise within the field. So it's going to be the events industry that decide who are going to be the movers and shakers within the events industry, right? So there's going to be somebody, and it always is, that's very, very driven, who has an idea of solving an innovative problem, who's agile, who's able to actually take those risks and create something really unique and valuable. And it will be then for the industry to actually say, do you know what, this is important to us, and to proliferate that. But there will always be, obviously, the impact from larger corporates who will actually say, this is a really cool technology. We think it's going to disrupt the events industry. Well, it's up to the guys in the events industry to actually say, yeah, we want it, we don't want it. So it's still a very human decision.
But it'll be someone who sort of recognizes the pain points and says, oh yeah, we can automate this, but more than automate it, we can actually apply machine intelligence to this and take that pain away and leave you a much smoother path to what you want to do.
Yeah, and it's from both sides, right? Both sides, again, from the small players to the big players, are going to be looking to address those pain points, right? And it's for us to decide whether or not how we tackle those pain points, basically.
Great. Okay, we've got a few minutes left. Does anyone have any questions? Because I'm really willing to throw this at someone if you want to try.
I can't throw, so he better throw. And if my brothers see this, they'll think it's hilarious. They'll go like that.
I'm almost tempted to make it. Do we have any questions from the floor? Don't be shy. Oh, we do. Okay. Oh, right. Brilliant. Can you think of an example of AI being used now in the energy industry? AI-controlled wind farms that is disrupting the industry. Do you want to take that, or shall I?
Yeah, why not? Okay, go on then.
Google is already using its technology from DeepMind, a British company that it bought for about £400 million in 2014. They've applied it to their server farms, and it's making a substantial saving on the energy there. So, yeah, there's definitely an example from that part of the energy industry. Google and DeepMind are also talking to UK power networks, I think, about finding better ways to do transmission through the UK grid. I'm not sure whether they've made any progress on that, but I think that as soon as they have something they want to share with us, then they will. So yes, there's definitely efforts being made in the energy industry, because that's quite an obvious one that you'd want to do that. AI-controlled wind farm, not so sure about that, because I think the wind just does what the wind is going to do. It's not particularly something we need to control the wind farm. You just decide what you're going to put the thing. Maya, other ones you want to take? Are we in Blade Runner 2050 or the Terminator?
Yeah.
Are we doomed to be subservient to AI? Yeah. Hey Siri, are you in charge of me?
I love those movies. Anyway, are we doomed to be subservient to AI? I love that question. AI is a technology that we are creating. What it is capable of, what we apply it to, is something that we will govern. Now, it kind of almost ties in with the AI with ethics, but I'll deal with that in a minute, I think. So, how do I describe it? Okay, so we talked about the three components needed for AI, and the most important...
Which is data, compute power, and...
Algorithms.
Algorithms.
Right. But the compute power and the algorithms mean nothing without the data. And the data is where we actually need to begin. So we've all heard those little stories. There's always one that pops up every week that a particular algorithm was biased against one demographic and not another, or didn't identify a particular group of people, or we hear about that an awful lot. But the problem is it's not the computing power of the algorithm itself that's actually caused the problem. It's the data that it's actually been trained on. So it's our responsibility, and this is where we actually start talking about ethics, is to actually look at that data set and make sure that it is representative of the people who are going to be using it in the end. That people almost on a granular level going in, if you're looking at structured data, going at line item and saying, okay, do I have those columns that actually will answer the questions that I need? When we're looking at images, do we have a sample that's representative of the people that are going to be using this particular technology? And at the end of the day, AI is actually going to be very much in the way when I described a child learning its way around the world. AI will be whatever we train and teach it to be. So we have to ask ourselves, if it's going to be a manifestation of who we are, what are our values, what are our ethics, and then we will have to actually overlay that into what we want our AIs to do. So if we start worrying about what the future holds, we also need to think about looking at the duality of human nature, or whatever you want to go into, about the things that we see AI being of benefit for, right? AI can actually help us deal with some of the really critical issues around social, some of the real social problems that we're actually having, issues around our planet, conservation, climate change. So you can see that AI is a force for good, but it's essentially how we want to apply that technology and what our values are.
Isn't one of the problems, though, that it's difficult to interrogate it? It's I mean, unlike a child, you can't say, why did you do that? You only know what it did and what the output is. I mean, you talked about bias and algorithms. One of the ones that came out this week, I think, was an algorithm for choosing people for jobs, and it turned out when they interrogated it closely, when they were able to sort of check it, they found that it would choose people if it would sort of be in favor of people either if their name was Jared or if they played lacrosse at high school. It's sort of that sort of thing where it's quite difficult to tease out why it is that it makes these decisions. And that must have been a data thing. But given that it's embedded in the system, how do you interrogate it and find out?
You need to go back again to the data, because at the end of the we then start talking about things like accountability and transparency. So the people who have brought the data sets together should go back over it and actually think, okay, we've seen what the output of this looks like. Now we have to look at how do we address the issues with the data set, right? And how do we actually show those who be using those services and products that we've actually addressed those issues, right? And make it very, very clear and obvious of how that data set was created and how it would be used. It is a bit of a tricky situation to get into when we actually talk about mathematics and what's actually going on in between. That's a whole other conference and conversation, but it always begins with that data, and the algorithm, the AI and technology aren't going to pick that up without us having influence.
We're slightly still in bad data, bad outputs.
Exactly, sort of. Garbage in, garbage out.
Okay.
As it always has been.
Yes.
Guys, we're right out of time. Please thank our amazing interview.